Welcome to our devotions as we continue to look at the most popular Bible verses. And today we are in 2 Corinthians chapter 12 and verse 9. But he said to me, "My grace is sufficient for you. My power is made perfect in weakness." That has been a verse that has really encouraged believers down through the years, particularly believers going through very difficult periods in their lives. That's a verse that has sustained them. It's a verse that has encouraged them to keep trusting in the Lord to carry them through the difficult days. Now, the background to this is fascinating. 2 Corinthians, in many ways, it's a bruising letter. Paul is facing great opposition from within the church in Corinth. And in many ways, 2 Corinthians is his defence. He has to defend himself. There's people who came into the church who basically were saying they were much greater and better than Paul. Paul nicknames these people the super apostles, and they were seeking to undermine Paul. And here are people who Paul has loved and has given so much to, who have been turning away from him. So 2 Corinthians, he's putting his case to them, he's defending himself, and he is speaking, and they boast about who they are. And so he says, this is foolish. But he says, let me engage in a bit of foolishness. And he talks about a great vision that he has of the Lord, a vision which he goes into heaven. Was he really in heaven? Was it just a vision? He says he doesn't know. And then he says, and this is where really he's getting the point, he says to stop him from being conceited, stop him from being proud of these great revelations, a thorn in the flesh was given to him. What was this thorn in the flesh? It's the best guess is that it seems to be some sort of physical ailment. Maybe it was poor eyesight, which he got from being stoned, or some other physical illness that he had. He speaks about 3 times he prayed to the Lord to take this away from him, whatever this thing was troubling him. And the Lord didn't take it away. Now that's amazingly so instructive for us, because there's some people who would say, and falsely say, that if you're a Christian you shouldn't be ill. If you're a Christian, all your illnesses should be taken away. Paul is the great apostle who has written a great portion of the New Testament. He was ill. He prayed, and it wasn't taken away. But the Lord instead gives him this answer. He doesn't give him the answer he initially wanted, but gives to Paul the answer that he needs. And that's because the Lord is a loving God. He's a loving Father. He knows how to deal with us. And so the answer to Paul in his illness, in his suffering, was, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness." So he's saying to Paul, I'm not going to take away this suffering. I'm not going to take away this trial, but my grace is sufficient for you. The Lord's grace is basically God at work. God at work on behalf of his people. And the Lord would continue to work for Paul and carry Paul through these difficult days. And so God's grace, not Paul's efforts, not Paul's work, but God's power and gift and goodness would carry him through. My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. The more that we are weak, the more we rely upon the Lord, the more then can we know his power coming into our lives. And this just thrilled Paul. He then says that he will boast in his weaknesses, because in his weakness he knows the strength of the Lord. And this was totally contrary to what these super apostles were teaching. It was all about strength, it was all about show, it was all about your own greatness. Paul's saying, in my weakness I know the Lord. In my weakness I know his strength and his power in my life. And so the way to know the Lord is not to be full of ourselves. The way to know his power and grace in our lives is not to be so caught up in who we are. It's being humble. It's knowing our frailty. It's knowing our weakness. It's knowing how we cannot go on by ourselves. And it's relying fully 100% in the great power of the Lord, the grace of Jesus Christ. Will you trust in the Lord? Will you stop relying on yourself? Will you, in your weakness, rely on His strength? Will you trust that His grace is sufficient for you in whatever trial you may face? You are weak, but He is strong. You are helpless, but He is all sufficient. Trust Him. Trust Him fully. Amen.